Hi and welcome to this application support webinar for the 2020 call for applications for strategic partnerships for higher education, also known as Key Action 203. My name is Matilda Manley-Lewis and I work as part of the Erasmus Plus customer service and events team.
My name's Sean James. I'm the customer service and events consultant with Erasmus Plus.
Hey everyone, I'm Laura Blagovic. I'm the Erasmus Plus HE sector lead, and with us today as well we've got our colleague Saman, who's available on the chat facility to answer your queries.
A little bit of housekeeping to start with. This presentation will run for approximately 45 minutes, followed by some questions and answers, but please feel free to drop your questions anytime during this webinar. That leads me on to another point, which is that the Zoom tool allows you to submit questions via the chat button available on your attendee control panel. This should appear at the bottom of your screen. As the control panel provides other navigating tools, we would like to ask you not to use any of these. We have muted your microphones and switched off your cameras, so you shouldn't need to do this yourself. Please make sure that any questions you submit are visible to all participants. When it comes to your questions, if possible, please ask questions that are relevant to the entire audience and try to avoid project-specific questions. At the end of the presentation, or even at the end of specific sections, we will pick the questions that we believe are most relevant to the entire audience and share that answer with you all. If we are not able to answer all your questions before the time is up, we'll email you the answer ASAP. Also, we'll aim to send you the slides by the end of the week. Today, we will go through some general information about the Key Action 2, as well as specific rules related to submitting an application for a Key Action 203 Strategic Partnerships for Higher Education. Before we start going through details of the application process, I would like to ask a question about your experience with submitting an Erasmus Plus online application under the Key Action 203. Once the question pops up, just click on one of the options.
We'll just give you roughly 10 seconds to answer those as well. So as we can see, a bit of a mixture really. 50% of you on the webinar today have applied before. We've got 100% of you that have applied were unsuccessful when you previously tried applying. So hopefully you'll be getting some really relevant tips today to help boost your applications and have more success in the future.
Okay, let's spend a few minutes focusing on the bigger picture away from the higher education sector, as the Erasmus Plus programme is much larger than that. This may help you to understand the scope of the Erasmus Plus programme. Erasmus Plus is the European Union programme for education, training, youth and sport organisations across all sectors of lifelong learning, including school education, further and higher education, adult education and the youth sector. The Erasmus Plus programme runs for 7 years, from 2014 until 2020, with organisations invited to apply for funding each year, and it's broken down into centralised and decentralised activities. The programme is structured around 5 actions, whilst only 3 are managed on the national level. The centralised activities are delivered at a European level across all participating countries by the European Commission's executive agency, which is based in Brussels. Centralised projects are larger and more strategic, designed to tackle specific issues throughout Europe. Decentralised activities, on the other hand, are delivered at a national level by a network of organisations known as national agencies. National agencies are themselves overseen by national authorities, which are government departments responsible for ensuring the programme is delivered in their countries. The UK National Agency is split between 2 organisations, the British Council and a chorus. The 2 organisations have different responsibilities. However, all higher education projects are managed by us here at the British Council. Key Action 2. Cooperation for innovation and the exchange of good practices support these key actions. Strategic partnerships in the field of higher education, training and youth, knowledge alliances, European universities, sector skills alliances, capacity building in the field of higher education, and capacity building in the field of youth. As you can see, some of the key actions are managed at the national level, whilst others are managed centrally by the executive agency in Brussels. The actions supported under this key action are expected to bring positive and long-lasting effects on the participating organisations, on the policy systems in which such actions are framed, as well as on the organisations and persons directly or indirectly involved in the organised activities. This key action is expected to result in the development, transfer and/or implementation of innovative practices at organisational, local, regional, national or European levels. Key Action 203, Strategic Partnership for Higher Education. Strategic partnerships aim to support the development, transfer and/or implementation of innovative practices, as well as the implementation of joint initiatives promoting cooperation, peer learning, and exchanges of experience at European level. Depending on the objectives and the composition of the strategic partnership, projects may be of two types: strategic partnerships supporting the exchange of good practices, or strategic partnerships supporting innovation. Please note that strategic partnerships relevant to the field of higher education do not support exchange of good practices. The only option you have is innovation. Each year, the European Commission sets horizontal and field-specific priorities for Key Action 2. These are priorities that the European Commission would like Key Action 2 projects to address, and so in your applications, you'll need to address either at least one horizontal priority or at least one field-specific priority. You'll also need to justify these extensively in the narrative part of your application. The programme guide also mentions that among these horizontal and field-specific priorities, national agencies may give more consideration to those that are particularly relevant in their national context, that is, European priorities in the national context. Please note that while some national agencies provide additional criteria, the UK National Agency has not. Therefore, this point is not relevant or applicable. Here is the list of the countries that can apply for funding under the 2020 call for strategic partnerships. Organisations from these countries can also be partners in a strategic partnership project. As a general rule, strategic partnerships target the cooperation between organisations established in programme countries. However, strategic partnerships can also involve organisations from partner countries, which are countries outside Europe. Organisations from partner countries can only be part of a Key Action 2 project as partners, not as applicants, as long as their participation brings an essential added value to the project. This has to be justified clearly in the narrative sections of the application. If you are planning to include a partner country, we encourage you to consider first whether the role could be filled by an organisation based in a programme country instead. Eligibility. Strategic partnership projects are expected to develop innovative outputs and/or engage into intensive dissemination and exploitation activities of existing and newly produced projects or innovative ideas. Applicants have the possibility to request a dedicated budget for intellectual outputs and multiplier events in order to directly answer to the innovation aspect of the action. All Key Action 2 projects are organisation-led. Individuals cannot apply directly for the grant. Whilst a staff member can complete the application form on behalf of their organisation, the project remains the organisation's responsibility, even if that staff member leaves the organisation. Please note that any higher education institution based in a so-called programme country and participating in a strategic partnership must hold the Erasmus Charter for Higher Education, in short ECHE, before applying. A strategic partnership is transnational and involves a minimum of 3 organisations from 3 different programme countries. There is no maximum number of participating organisations. However, the budget for project management and implementation is capped and equivalent to 10 participating organisations. All participating organisations must be identified at the time of applying for a grant. All the activities of a strategic partnership must take place in the countries of the organisations participating in the project. Learning, teaching and training activities for learners and long-term activities for staff can only be organised in programme countries. In addition, if duly justified in relation to the objectives or implementation of the project, activities can also take place at the seat of an institution of the European Union, and multiplier events can be hosted in the country of any of the associated partners involved in the strategic partnership. Key Action 203 projects can last between 24 and 36 months, with no project ending later than 31st of August 2023. Please note, any activity that falls outside the project start and end date will be deemed ineligible for funding. Strategic partnerships may also organise transnational learning, teaching and training activities of individuals, insofar as they bring added value in the achievement of the project's objectives. The Erasmus Charter for Higher Education. Please note that if your higher education institution doesn't currently hold the ECHE, you won't be able to apply for Erasmus Plus funding under this 2020 call, as the last ECHE call for application was open in March 2019, and no ECHE call will be open in 2020. Once your institution is awarded the ECHE, you are awarded it for the programme duration, or rather the end of your project. Therefore, you do not need to apply for it again. If you're not sure if your institution holds an ECHE, you can check via the ECHE list online by clicking on the website hyperlink in this slide. Preparing to apply. The 24th of March 2020, 11 AM UK time, is the deadline for submitting applications under the Key Action 203. Please ensure that you begin working on your application as soon as possible, as the closer to the deadline we are, the busier the Erasmus Plus help desk is. So while we do our best to support all applicants, this might not be possible if you submit questions right before the deadline. It may be useful to know that once the form is submitted, you still will be able to reopen and resubmit it repeatedly, if you wish, until the submission deadline has expired. The later submission is the one that will be accepted and evaluated by the national agency. There is an alternative submissions procedure if you suffer technical issues that prevent you from being able to submit your application, and a link to this process is provided in our written application guidance on our website. The Erasmus Plus website obviously has a lot of helpful information, and it's probably advisable, if you're a new applicant, to take some time and navigate through the top pages of the website down to the registration and application pages. Please note that the organisation ID has replaced the PIC as the unique identifier for an organisation to apply. Organisations that have previously participated in Erasmus Plus and European Solidarity Corps actions managed by a national agency and had a PIC number have been assigned an OID automatically, and therefore shouldn't register again. Information about your organisation is stored in the organisation registration system, and it is each organisation's responsibility to keep this information up to date. As you can see in the slide, there are plenty of resources to help you with completing your online application, so please refer to them when writing your application. Completing the application form. Please allow plenty of time to complete the application form as it's quite comprehensive. We're going to have a look at the online application now. So it's important to note at application stage that if approved, you'll be contractually bound by the UK National Agency to deliver your project in line with the information provided in the application form. No deviations from this information will be permitted, as this could affect the assessment result. When completing your application form, please ensure all information presented in the form, including partners, countries, and participants involved, as well as planned activities, is correct, realistic, and will not be subject to change. It is also important to ensure that all parties involved are aware of their responsibilities and are fully committed to your project.
And just to let you know, we've just moved on to the actual portal website now, just to give you a quick demonstration.
Okay. The 2020 online application forms are accessible from many sites, such as from the UK National Agency's website and the European Commission's website. Whichever way you use, you'll end up on the application form portal. An EU login will be required to access the portal. If you already have your access to the Mobility Tool Plus, you can use the same logins. If not, never mind, it will prompt you to create your personal login. Once you are in the portal, click on Higher Education, which, as you can see, will lead you to the group of online applications relevant to the higher education institutions. To enter the application form, just click on the blue Apply button. And it may be useful to know that as you work through the form, it automatically saves your work every 2 seconds. You'll also be able to go in and out of the application as you wish, right until the submission deadline on the 24th of March. If you wish to close the form and work on it at a later date, you can access the application under the My Applications tab of the Web Application Forms homepage. We would probably just recommend bookmarking the page for an easy return to your application. Every online application starts with this welcome message, reminding you of the European Commission's guidelines. And we recommend at least a quick scroll through so you have a good understanding of all the aspects of the online form. You can return to the guidelines anytime by clicking on the guidelines in the left-hand vertical side menu. The application for Key Action 203 has got 16 content sections, as you can see on the left. Just very briefly, the first 2 and the last 2 content sections are administrative and shouldn't take long to complete. Context refers to the project title, start and end date, duration, national agency, and language relevant to your project. As the title says, in the next section, you'll be completing information about yours and other participating organisations by entering the OID numbers that we spoke about previously. All details of your organisation are then generated automatically based on the OID. Whilst this is fairly straightforward, I would like to draw your attention to the project contacts and encourage you to nominate 3 contacts immediately to avoid filling additional forms later on. Whilst your project will involve a number of organisations from across Europe, only the lead organisation of the partnership submits an application to their national agency. This submission is made on behalf of the whole partnership. Project partners do not need to submit the same application to their own national agency. The lead organisation is then responsible for keeping partner organisations up to date with the progress of the project application. Regarding the last 2 sections in annexes, all you'll need to do is download, sign and attach the Declaration of Honour and the partner mandate. The checklist section is there to ensure that you have completed all compulsory parts of the application by ticking the check boxes. Regarding the narrative parts of the application, which is section 3 to 14, we pay a lot of attention to its content in our guide for applicants that we published as one of the support resources for you on the Erasmus Plus website. So please do refer to it when completing the application.
Just a word on sharing your application form. You'll notice there's an option at the bottom there for sharing. You can share it with people who might be helping you with writing it or checking the application form, but only the person who created the form can submit it. So please remember that when it comes to submission stage, because we have had some issues in past calls where people who have just had sharing rights to the form have tried to submit and they won't be able to. So it has to be the original owner of the form that does that.
I think that can actually cause quite a few different technical issues with the application. So just in the interest of keeping things simple, try and complete the application from the person that's registered to complete the application in the first place.
Yeah, and you can work offline as well if you wanted. So some of the questions you can work offline. Just be mindful of the character count in the narrative, and then you can just put it into the form when you're happy with that, like Sean said, to prevent those issues. Lots of people being in and out of the form.
Okay, so we're going to pop back into the PowerPoint now.
Bear with me just a moment.
Okay, so before we go through your questions, let's just go over some of the common ones that we receive. Institutions do ask us if they can submit more applications under the same call and the same key action. Indeed, under this key action you can, even though all applications would come under one organisation ID. The objectives, topics and outputs would need to be distinctive and not overlap with one another in order to prevent double funding. The difference in projects, then, is given by the project title. On the other hand, if you submitted several projects with the same title, only the last received would be the one that would be considered. Some applicants have been wondering whether there are any disadvantages in applying for shorter or longer project durations. The simple answer is no. From the assessment point of view, there really aren't any disadvantages, and choosing any length is possible. With regards to the mandatory annexes for the application, you'll need to attach 2 files, which are the Declaration of Honour and Partner Mandates.
Just another common query we get on that, actually, the Declaration of Honour. Something we get a lot of help desk is you get to the point of submitting and your legal representative is not available to sign the Declaration of Honour. In those instances, what you can do instead is there should be somebody else at your institution that is allowed to sign on behalf of the university. You would just need a letter from your HR department to confirm that that person has the authority to sign, and they can sign in the place of the legal representative. If you need any guidance on that and you're not sure about what to provide or who can sign, just get in touch with the help desk. So moving on to budget now then, you'll have seen on the form lots of different categories, so we're going to go over those in a bit more detail now. An Erasmus Plus KA203 grant is made up of 6 budget categories, which together make up your total grant amount. So project management and implementation, or PMI for short, will be automatically added to your grant total as is calculated according to the length of your project. You can see on the screen the wide variety of activities it could be used for, and we will be sharing these slides afterwards. Transnational project meetings are used for partners in the project to meet and coordinate the project. However, you should justify the need for these meetings in terms of the number of them and the number of participants involved in your application. Meetings should be limited, and you should give consideration to whether it would be possible to conduct the meeting over Skype rather than meeting face-to-face. So the 2 categories that we had there were unit costs. The 2 you can see now are based on real costs. This means you can enter any amount into the box within the application form. Before doing so, it's important to consider whether what you're applying for is eligible, has it been justified within the application, and does it demonstrate value for money. So first of all, special needs support. This is directly related to participants with disabilities and accompanying persons. Special needs support cannot be claimed for after the application stage, so you must claim for it in the application if you think there's a high possibility that it will be needed to support participants with disabilities to take part in any of your activities, in your mobility activities, sorry, I should say. The award for exceptional cost funding is not a given, so you will need to put clear and full justification in your application to be able to have this category. As you can see in the slide, exceptional costs are based on actual costs and must be supported by invoices and receipts when you come to final report stage. Before requesting exceptional costs, please check whether the cost cannot be covered by any other budget. Most likely this would be the PMI. Exceptional costs can only be requested if they are critical to the success of the project and are services, goods or items that cannot be provided by any of the organisations involved in the project. Intellectual outputs are activities requiring substantial staff input in order to produce significant outputs. To distinguish the production of such outputs from those covered by the funding automatically awarded to a project under the PMI category, these outputs will have to be set out in detail, demonstrating clearly that they are concrete outputs and that there is a large effort that goes into producing them. The output should be innovative and creative, so there should be something new. It can't be building on something you already have. And be developed with a clear aim of transferring them to organisations other than those participating in the project. So what that means is this can't be an output that only benefits you and your consortium. It needs to have a wider purpose and a wider use. So it will only be considered an intellectual output, in fact, if it can be proven in your application form that there is potential for this wider use and exploitation, as well as for impact on the wider sector and on a national and international level. The production of an intellectual output is a process consisting of different steps that finally leads to the actual output itself. For example, conducting an analysis, researching, translating. These steps by themselves are not considered outputs. They're part of the process. Staff costs for managers and administrative staff are already covered through the PMI budget, but they may be eligible for funding if their role working on the intellectual output is distinctly different from their regular role as a project manager or administrator of the project. Again, a clear justification must be provided. When you're selecting whether the staff time should be considered as a manager or administrative staff, you need to consider the role the individual has on the intellectual output rather than the role they have in the organisation. So, for example, if you have a professor who's undertaking admin duties for an intellectual output, you should select administrative staff to reflect the role they have on the project and not manager to reflect their usual day-to-day role in the organisation. To be considered as staff, the beneficiary has to be able to demonstrate the formal link between the staff and the organisation, usually via a contract. You'll also need staff timesheets, evidence of the person working at the organisation, and tangible evidence of the output itself. Staff working for the beneficiary on the basis of service contracts, so things like translators or maybe a web designer, are not considered as staff of the organisation concerned. Their working time can therefore not be claimed under intellectual output. Moving on to multiplier events now. So these are only available to projects that are producing intellectual outputs. The aim of the multiplier event is to share these outputs to individuals and organisations outside of the Erasmus Plus project, so outside of your consortium. The multiplier event should disseminate and increase the impact of any of your intellectual outputs, and other dissemination events will be supported via your PMI funds. Multiplier events should be organised by the partnership, for example, conferences, seminars, or meetings that are directly associated to one or more of the intellectual outputs developed through the work of your project. If you are not planning to hold any multiplier events, you don't need to complete this section, but please think about this carefully because you can't request this funding retrospectively, so consider it when you're filling out the application form. The aim of the multiplier event should be to test, to implement, or disseminate the intellectual output to a wider audience. They should involve a large number of participants from organisations that are not already involved with the partnership itself, and such events can be organised at a national or transnational level. Multiplier events, as we've already spoken about, can only take place in the programme countries in which the beneficiaries are located. Both the profile and number of participants will have to be justified, as well as the approach to attract and involve relevant external organisations and stakeholders. The key thing here is wider impact through those events. Moving on now to award criteria. So it's a two-stage process. The first stage is a formal eligibility check, which is undertaken by staff here at the UK National Agency. The second stage is the qualitative assessment of the application, so your narrative, and is undertaken by external experts. Please note that the overall budget for Key Action 2 is limited. Funding decisions are made based on the quality score, so it's a very competitive process. Experts will assess each section of the application form against the award criteria, which is listed in the 2020 programme guide. Approved projects are then ranked in terms of their overall assessment score, and the programme budget will be allocated from the highest scoring to the lowest until the budget for that activity type is fully distributed. So moving on, the award criteria. To be considered for funding, proposals must score at least 60 points out of 100, and you must score at least half of the maximum points in each of the categories. So, for example, a minimum of 15 points for relevance of project and impact and dissemination, and 10 points for quality of the project design and quality of the project team. As previously mentioned, proposals that do not address at least one priority of the action will not be funded. They'll be considered ineligible. I'm not going to read these slides out word for word. As you can see, there's an awful lot of text. So these are for your information when we send the slides out, but this is actually the assessment criteria in full, which you can also find in the programme guide. We'll just move through these slides slowly so you can see some of the information, but mainly I would recommend returning to this after the webinar and reviewing what the assessors are looking for when they're assessing your application form. If we move to the final slide of impact and dissemination criteria, that's the one. You'll notice the reference at the end there to the 2020 guide for experts, which I think we've already briefly mentioned as well. This is a very useful document, which I can't recommend enough to you because it shows you not just this assessment criteria, which is on those few slides there, but it really gives you an idea of what the assessors are looking for you to be successful. It's publicly available, and you really would recommend that you look at this before, when you're filling out your narrative part of the application form. I'll end on just a few points for consideration. I know there's an awful lot to take in this webinar, but just a final few points to really think about. Impact and dissemination is consistently the area of the application where people score the lowest. To score well here, you need to think about ongoing activities throughout the 2 or 3 years of the project. So impact assessment should not just be at the end. How do you know how your project is going in achieving its aims unless you assess it throughout? And with dissemination, it's not just about sharing your final product. Dissemination should be built in from the start of your project. So consider how you might share success stories, lessons learned, anything really throughout the project lifetime. And that starts right at the start of your project. It's often a misconception that dissemination just happens at the very end, and it's not. And a final word on accuracy. We've mentioned a couple of times, please be mindful of this because you can't claim it retrospectively. Not just that, but also be accurate and remember to cross-check in your application. Does the narrative match up with what you've requested in terms of budget? So for example, if you're requesting a multiplier event, is the multiplier event mentioned in the narrative? Assessors pick up on this, and it does slow down the assessment process if we do need to query the budget, but also it does reflect badly if the assessor notices these discrepancies. So I would very strongly recommend that you get somebody to proofread your application, because a second pair of eyes is always very helpful in a situation, but also just to make sure that you're fully accurate and that your application is very strong and very clear on what you're trying to achieve. I'll hand back to Matilda now, who's going to talk about the application submission.
Okay. So I'll just quickly read through the slide. You will not be able to click on the submit button until all sections of the web form are complete. You'll receive a confirmation email upon submitting the application, and you should submit your application only when you are happy with the finalised version. However, anytime before the deadline, you can return to your already submitted application under the My Applications tab, correct and resubmit it. All applications are first checked for eligibility, and applications that are eligible are then taken on for further assessment before an award decision is made. So when will you hear about your application and whether it's been successful? The indicative date of the notification of award decision is 4 months from the submission deadline. That will bring us to July 2020. The date for signing a grant agreement then is 5 months from the submission deadline, which will bring us to August 2020. For all successful organisations, the notification of results email will outline the dates in which we aim to complete the contracting process. We are only able to issue grant agreements once all of the necessary contracting documents have been submitted and accepted. Full details about the documents that need to be submitted to support the contracting process will be outlined in the contracting instructions issued to projects following the notification of results email. Higher education projects are multi-beneficiary grants, and this means that if your project is funded, the lead organisation will receive the contract and the funds. Finally, we just want to share with you our contact details. The team here at the UK National Agency is available every day from Monday to Friday to answer any queries you may have. Before we move on to the Q&As, we're just going to launch one more poll, which is a satisfaction survey, as we would really appreciate your feedback. Again, once a question pops up, just click on one of the options.
As previously, we're going to give you a roughly 10 seconds to complete that as well.
Okay, thanks everyone. We're just going to go through the question and answers now.
We'll just pop ourselves on mute for a moment while we go through and see if there's any questions. I can see that someone has been answering a lot of those as we're going along, so we'll just come back on if there's anything we think we should share with the group, but otherwise we'll just work through the questions now. Thank you. Just I can see there's a question in the chat about can you edit the application at the same time from 2 different sources? That's come from Lindsay. I believe that you can, Lindsay, but I would be wary of it, to be honest, because the form, you might save over each other's information, which even if you're not working on the same section, the forms do have a few bugs in them at the moment. So I would try and avoid it if you can. I think technically it's possible, but I just think from a side of caution, because of the way the forms have been the last few weeks, it might be better to
maybe have a shared document that you work together on offline, and as I said, then upload the final version to the form when you're ready, just to make sure that you're not losing any content. That's fair.
Yeah, I mean, as said before, really, if you are able to stick to the same person in terms of the actual logging in to the interactive platform, it really does help you sort of avoid a number of potential technical difficulties. As Lara suggested, that's a really good idea. If you can sort of cooperate on an offline form and then stick to the same person logging in online, that would be ideal. But if possible, yeah, if you can stick to that one person on the interactive portal, that is ideal.
I think that's all the questions answered now. So we will sign off from here. Thank you very much for listening, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for your time
Thank
today,
you.
and best of luck with future applications.